Septuplets turn 18. See how this famous family grew up. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine lawn of the Morrison family home, where 18 years of memories had accumulated like precious stones in a jewelry box. Today marked a milestone that would echo through the quiet streets of Cedar Grove, transforming their usually peaceful neighborhood into a bustling hub of activity. Television vans line the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like mechanical flowers, while journalists clutched their notebooks and cameramen adjusted their equipment with practiced precision. Before we can continue, if you love your family, subscribe to this channel to help up creating amazing stories. Now, let's continue. Inside the Victorian-style house, Emily Morrison stood before her mirror, fingers trembling as she attempted to fasten a delicate silver necklace, a birthday gift from her grandmother. The pendant caught the light filtering through her bedroom window, sending tiny rainbows dancing across her walls. As the youngest of the septuplets, by exactly 4 minutes, she had always felt a peculiar pressure to prove herself, to carve out her own identity among her 6 siblings. Down the hall, Marcus, the firstborn, paced in his room, his footsteps creating a steady rhythm that had become familiar to everyone in the house over the years. His dark hair was neatly combed, his button-down shirt pressed to perfection, every detail carefully considered for the cameras that would soon capture their every move. The weight of being the eldest, even by mere minutes, had shaped him into the unofficial spokesperson for the group, a role he hadn't asked for but had grown to accept with quiet dignity. Sophia, the artist of the family, sat cross-legged on her bed, sketching rapidly in her worn notebook. Her auburn hair fell in waves around her face as she tried to capture the emotion of the moment, the anticipation, the uncertainty, the electric energy that seemed to crackle through the house. Her drawings had always been her way of processing the world, of making sense of their extraordinary lives. In the room next door, Alexander, Alex to everyone except their mother during moments of frustration, adjusted his tie for the 10th time. His fingers moved with the precision of someone who had spent years under scrutiny, though his green eyes betrayed a hint of weariness. As the family's practical joker, he had always used humor to deflect attention, but today felt different. The gravity of turning 18 weighed on him, making even his usual quick wit feel somehow inadequate. Catherine, whom everyone called Kat, stood in the doorway of her room, watching the growing crowd through a gap in her curtains. Her tennis medals glinted on the wall behind her, testament to the one area where she had managed to distinguish herself from her siblings. The morning light caught the hint of copper in her hair, the same shade all 7 of them shared, though each wore it differently. Her athletic frame was tense with nervous energy, her fingers unconsciously tapping against the door frame in rhythm with her racing thoughts. In the bathroom they all shared, an arrangement that had required military-level scheduling over the years. Rachel applied the finishing touches to her makeup. As the most comfortable with their public life, she had always seemed to thrive under the spotlight. Yet today, even her usually confident hands showed signs of uncertainty as she carefully applied mascara. The magazine covers featuring their family through the years were stored in boxes in the attic, but their weight still pressed down on her shoulders. Daniel, the 6th born and quietest of the 7, sat on the window seat in his room, reading a worn copy of The Great Gatsby. While the others prepared for the cameras, he sought solace in literature, as he always had. His wire-rimmed glasses reflected the growing chaos outside, but his expression remained serene, almost distant. Of all the siblings, he had always struggled most with their fame, preferring the company of books to the constant attention of strangers. Their parents, Thomas and Claire Morrison, moved through the house like seasoned stage managers, checking on each child with practiced efficiency. 18 years of raising septuplets had taught them the delicate art of dividing their attention 7 ways while making each child feel individually seen and heard. Claire's voice carried up the stairs, a gentle reminder that the interviewer would arrive in 30 minutes. The smell of coffee and cinnamon rolls, their traditional birthday breakfast, wafted through the house, mixing with the scent of hair products and the subtle undertone of nervous energy. In the kitchen, 18 candles waited to be lit, a visual reminder of the magnitude of this day. The local bakery had outdone themselves this year, creating 7 individual cakes, each decorated to reflect the personality of its recipient. Outside, the crowd continued to grow. Cedar Grove had always been protective of their famous residents, but today the town seemed to buzz with a different kind of energy. Neighbors who had watched the Septuplets grow up stood in their yards, sharing stories with the gathered media about the countless times they'd seen the 7 children riding their bikes down the street or selling lemonade on hot summer days. The family's journey had been documented since before their birth, from the shocking ultrasound revelation to their miraculous arrival on a stormy October night. Every milestone had been shared with the world. Their first steps, first words, first day of school, all multiplied by 7. Their lives had unfolded like a reality show that nobody had pitched, but everyone wanted to watch. As the morning progressed, the siblings gradually congregated in the upstairs hallway, drawn together by habit and shared anxiety. Emily fiddled with her necklace, while Marcus straightened his already straight collar. Sophia clutched her sketchbook like a shield, while Alex cracked jokes that didn't quite land with their usual impact. Kat continued her vigilant watch of the growing crowd. Rachel checked her reflection one final time, and Daniel reluctantly closed his book. "They're here for the same reason they've always been here," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the tension visible in his shoulders. "Because somehow, 7 babies being born at once is still interesting 18 years later. More like they're waiting to see if we'll finally crack," Alex quipped, but the humor didn't quite reach his eyes. 18 years of being perfect must be about to wear thin, right? Rachel shot him a look that was equal parts understanding and warning. "We're not perfect, and we've never claimed to be. That's their narrative, not ours." "Maybe that's what we should talk about in the interview," Sophia suggested, her voice soft but determined. "About how exhausting it is to be seen as some kind of medical miracle instead of just us." The words hung in the air, heavy with 18 years of accumulated pressure. They had been this famous 7 for so long that sometimes it felt like their individual identities had been subsumed by the collective narrative. Their story had been told and retold in magazines, documentaries, and news specials, but somehow, it never quite captured the reality of their lives. Catherine moved away from her window, joining the growing cluster of siblings. "I saw Mrs. Henderson out there with her famous apple pie. Remember when we were 10, and she brought one over every week because she thought we all looked too skinny?" The memory brought genuine smiles to their faces. Their community had always walked the line between supportive and overprotective, creating a bubble of normalcy in what could have been an overwhelmingly public childhood. Daniel finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "I counted 15 news vans. Apparently, turning 18 is just as newsworthy as being born." The sound of their mother's footsteps on the stairs interrupted any response. Claire Morrison appeared, her face composed but her eyes bright with emotion. "The interviewer from Good Morning America will be here in 5 minutes. Are you all ready?" The siblings exchanged glances, years of shared experiences passing between them in silent communication. They had done this countless times before, sat under the lights, answered the same questions about their unique bond, their challenges, their dreams. But today felt different. Today, they weren't just the famous septuplets. They were 7 young adults on the cusp of their individual futures. As they descended the stairs together, their footsteps falling into an unconscious rhythm, the flash of cameras began through the windows. The outside world was eager to capture this moment, to add another chapter to the story they had been following for 18 years. But within the walls of their home, in the space between camera flashes and interview questions, 7 individuals prepared to share not just their story, but their truth. Their father waited at the bottom of the stairs, his pride evident in his smile despite the worry lines around his eyes. The living room had been transformed into a makeshift studio, with lights and cameras creating an all-too-familiar scene. As they took their places on the arranged seating, each sibling felt the weight of this milestone. They were no longer just the miracle babies who had captured the world's attention. They were 7 individuals preparing to step into adulthood, carrying the unique burden and blessing of their shared journey. The interviewer's arrival was heralded by a flurry of activity: final light adjustments, microphone checks, powder being dabbed on 7 faces that shared the same genetic blueprint but told different stories. As the countdown to broadcast began, they instinctively drew closer together, their shoulders touching in a familiar gesture of unity. Whatever came next, whatever paths they would choose, this moment belonged to them. 7 hearts beating in synchronicity, 7 stories intertwined but distinct, 7 futures waiting to unfold. The bright studio lights warmed their faces as the interviewer leaned forward, her perfectly manicured hands clasped around a stack of note cards. "Let's go back," she suggested, her voice carrying that practiced blend of curiosity and compassion. "Your story has captivated millions for 18 years. What are your earliest memories of growing up in the spotlight?" The question triggered a cascade of memories, shared glances between siblings speaking volumes about moments captured and uncaptured by cameras. Claire Morrison's hand found her husband's, their fingers intertwining as the past washed over them like a gentle tide. "I remember the sound of cameras clicking," Marcus offered, his voice thoughtful. "It was like background music to our childhood, constant, rhythmic, almost like a lullaby. But what I remember more clearly was Mom singing to us every night, 7 different lullabies, never mixing them up." Claire's eyes misted at the memory. Those early days had been a blur of midnight feedings, color-coded onesies, and an elaborate scheduling system that covered an entire wall of their kitchen. The local newspaper had run a story about their organizational methods, dubbing it the Morrison Method, a term that would later be referenced in parenting magazines across the country. "The community really rallied around us," Thomas added, his voice thick with gratitude. "I remember coming home from the hospital to find our front yard filled with volunteers. They had organized themselves into shifts, cooking, cleaning, helping with laundry. Mrs. Peterson from the grocery store coordinated meal deliveries for 6 months." Catherine smiled, remembering the stories they'd been told countless times. "The town literally built an addition to our house. Mr. Romano, the contractor, gathered his entire crew and dozens of volunteers. They worked through weekends to create enough space for 7 cribs, 7 changing tables, 7 of everything." "7 of everything," Rachel echoed, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. "Except attention. That we learned to share from day one." The memories sparked another, and suddenly Alex was laughing. "Remember the color coding system? I was yellow, always yellow. Mom dressed me in yellow for so long that when I started picking my own clothes, I refused to wear it for an entire year." "That's because you were the one who kept crawling away," Claire defended, laughing. "We needed to spot you quickly in our sleep-deprived haze. You were like a little escape artist." The interviewer smiled encouragingly, but Daniel's quiet voice cut through the moment of levity. "It wasn't always easy though, was it? Being watched all the time, having our every move documented." A subtle shift occurred in the room, the weight of his words settling over them like a familiar blanket. Their parents exchanged glances, years of careful navigation evident in their shared look. "No, it wasn't," Thomas acknowledged. "We tried to balance the public's interest with your need for normalcy. The sponsorships helped us provide for you all. 7 college funds don't build themselves, but we were always conscious of the pressure it put on you." Sophia opened her sketchbook, revealing a drawing she'd done years ago, 7 small figures huddled together under an enormous spotlight. "I drew this when I was 12, she explained. "It was after that big magazine spread about our first day of middle school. Remember how the photographer kept telling us to look more natural?" Emily reached for the book, her fingers tracing the careful lines. 6 hours of photographs to capture one spontaneous moment of us walking into school. And then they didn't even use those shots. They went with the ones of us at our lockers instead. The memories began flowing faster now, each sibling contributing pieces to the mosaic of their shared childhood. They remembered the camera crews that had documented their first steps, the reporters who had camped outside their house when they all caught chicken pox within days of each other, the documentary team that had followed them through their first day of kindergarten. "People don't realize how much work goes into looking effortless," Rachel mused. "Remember those Christmas card photos? Hours of trying to get 7 toddlers to smile at the same time. Mom cried during the session when we were 4, Marcus recalled. Not because we were misbehaving, but because it was the first time we all spontaneously hugged each other right when the camera clicked." The photographer said he'd never seen anything like it. Claire nodded. The memory's still clear. That photo ended up everywhere. Magazines, newspapers, even a billboard in Times Square for that children's clothing brand that sponsored us. But what the public didn't see was what happened right after. All 7 of you decided to have a mud pie contest in your Christmas outfits. The siblings laughed, the sound harmonizing in a way that only years of shared joy could produce. Even Daniel, usually reserved, smiled at the memory. Dad just stood there with the garden hose, spraying us down one by one while Mom tried to salvage the clothes. The sponsors were understanding, thankfully, Thomas added. They said it made us more relatable. 7 perfect children would have been impossible to believe anyway. The mention of sponsors brought another dimension to their shared history. The financial reality of raising septuplets had been daunting, even with Thomas's teaching salary and Claire's part-time work from home. The sponsorships had been a necessity, but they came with their own complications. We had to learn media training before we learned multiplication tables, Catherine reflected. Remember those weekly meetings with Ms. Hartford, the PR consultant? She taught us how to answer questions, how to sit for photographs, how to handle attention without letting it go to our heads. She also taught us what not to say, Alex added, his expression suddenly serious. Like when that reporter tried to pit us against each other, asking who was the smartest, the most athletic, the most likely to succeed. We knew better than to play that game. Emily nodded, remembering. We made a pact when we were 10. No matter what anyone asked, we wouldn't compare ourselves to each other. We were different people who happened to share a birthday and DNA. That pact saved us, Marcus acknowledged. Especially during middle school, when everyone seemed determined to rank us, label us, figure out who is the pretty one, or the smart one, or the talented one. Their parents had fought those labels too, working tirelessly to nurture each child's individual interests and talents. The house had become a carefully orchestrated chaos of different activities. Catherine's tennis equipment sharing space with Sophia's art supplies, Daniel's books competing for shelf space with Rachel's fashion magazines, Alex's comedy props scattered among Marcus's debate trophies, while Emily's collection of scientific specimens occupied every available windowsill. Remember when Mom turned the basement into that amazing study space? Rachel asked. 7 different desks, 7 different lighting setups, 7 different ways to learn. The magazine article called it excessive, but it was exactly what we needed. Claire smiled at the memory. That article missed the point entirely. They focused on the cost, the logistics, the extravagance of it all. What they didn't understand was that it wasn't about the furniture. It was about giving each of you space to grow into yourselves. The media always wanted us to be either completely unified or dramatically different, Daniel observed. They never seemed to understand that we could be both, that we could support each other while still being our own people. Thomas leaned forward, his expression earnest. That was always our biggest challenge as parents, helping you maintain that balance. We wanted you to have the bond that comes with being septuplets without letting it define you completely, the interviewer interjected gently. And how do you think you managed that balance? The siblings exchanged glances, years of shared understanding passing between them. It was Sophia who finally answered, her artist's eye finding the right words to paint the picture. Our parents created this incredible ecosystem, she explained. Think of it like a garden where 7 different types of flowers are growing. They all need sunlight and water, but each one needs something slightly different to thrive. Mom and Dad somehow figured out how to give each of us exactly what we needed while keeping the whole garden healthy. But it wasn't just Mom and Dad, Emily added. The whole town became part of our support system. Remember Mr. Chun from the bookstore? He would set aside 7 copies of every new release he thought we'd like, each with a different bookmark that matched our personalities. And Coach Martinez, Catherine continued, who somehow managed to attend every single one of our different sports events and performances. She'd go from my tennis matches to Alex's improv shows to Rachel's dance recitals, all in one day sometimes. The memories continued to flow, each one revealing another layer of their unique childhood. They remembered the town festivals where they were always given special roles, the school plays where teachers worked tirelessly to ensure each sibling had a meaningful part, the community fundraisers that helped send them to various summer camps, together and apart. as their interests diverged. "We were lucky," Marcus concluded, his voice carrying the weight of 18 years of perspective. "Not just because we had each other, or because we had amazing parents, or because we had a supportive community. We were lucky because somehow all of those pieces came together to help us become who we are today." The interviewer smiled warmly, clearly moved by their reflections. "And who are you today?" she asked, but before any of them could answer, the next phase of their story began to unfold in their minds, the present moment, with all its challenges and possibilities, stretching out before them like an unwritten chapter. As the interview continued, the conversation naturally shifted toward their futures, and the energy in the room subtly changed. The comfortable nostalgia of shared memories gave way to a more complex tension, like 7 different melodies trying to find harmony in a new composition. Marcus was the first to address their individual paths, his natural leadership showing even in this vulnerable moment. "I've been accepted to Stanford," he revealed, his voice steady despite the slight tremor in his hands. "Their political science program is exactly what I've been dreaming of, but..." He glanced at his siblings, the unspoken weight of separation hanging in the air. "But it's California," Rachel finished for him, understanding evident in her voice. She smoothed her skirt, a gesture that had become her tell when nervous. "I'll be on the opposite coast at FIT in New York. Fashion design has always been my passion, and New York is where I need to be to pursue it." The physical distance their choices would create was suddenly tangible, stretching across the room like an invisible map. Their parents sat quietly, their presence supportive, but careful not to influence the conversation. They had always known this day would come, had prepared for it with college funds and emotional discussions, but the reality felt different from any hypothetical scenario they'd imagined. Emily fidgeted with her necklace again, her scientific mind already calculating the miles and time zones that would separate them. "I've accepted the full scholarship to MIT," she said softly. "The research opportunities in their biochemistry department are unprecedented. But I've been looking into video conferencing software, ways we can maintain regular contact despite the distance." "Always the problem solver," Alex teased, but his usual humor carried a note of melancholy. "Meanwhile, I'll be the only one staying in state. The University of Iowa's theater program isn't just a fallback. It's exactly where I want to be. Plus, someone needs to keep an eye on things here." He glanced at their parents, acknowledging the unspoken comfort his proximity would provide. Catherine leaned forward, her athletic frame tense with suppressed energy. "I've enlisted in the Air Force," she announced, her voice carrying both pride and apprehension. The revelation created a ripple of reactions among her siblings, though none seemed entirely surprised. Her determination and discipline had always pointed toward military service, but the reality of it struck harder than the possibility had. "Basic training starts in August," she continued. "They can't tell me exactly where I'll be stationed after that, but I've already researched bases around the country. I'm hoping to specialize in aerospace engineering eventually." Sophia, who had been quietly sketching throughout the conversation, finally looked up from her notebook. "I got into Rhode Island School of Design," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Full scholarship. They want me to start an accelerated program this summer." Her announcement was met with proud smiles, but also understanding looks. Summer had always been their time together, their chance to reconnect and strengthen their bonds away from public scrutiny. Daniel, who had remained characteristically quiet, finally spoke. "I'm taking a gap year," he said, his voice firm despite the surprise this generated. "I've been accepted to several universities, but I need time to figure out what I really want. I've been offered an opportunity to travel with a literary magazine, reviewing books and writing about different cultural perspectives on literature." The interviewer leaned forward, intrigued by this tapestry of diverse ambitions. "It seems you're all choosing very different paths. How does that feel, after spending your entire lives together?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. It was Emily who finally answered, her scientific precision giving way to emotional honesty. "It feels like stepping off a cliff," she admitted. "We know our parachutes will open. We've prepared for this. We've trained for this moment our whole lives. But there's still that moment of terror before the jump. But we're not jumping alone," Marcus added quickly, his protective instinct surfacing. We're making different choices, yes, but we're making them together. Supporting each other's decisions, even when they take us in different directions. Rachel nodded, her fashion designer's eyes seeing the patterns in their choices. It's like we're creating a patchwork quilt, she mused. Each piece is distinct, beautiful in its own right. But when you step back, you can see how they all fit together to create something even more meaningful. Their parents watched this exchange with a mixture of pride and concern, their own emotions carefully contained to allow their children this moment of independence. Claire's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, while Thomas's arm rested protectively across the back of her chair. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting new shadows across the room, highlighting the subtle differences in their 7 faces. Though they shared the same genetic blueprint, their expressions now told 7 distinct stories of hope, fear, determination, and dreams. The thing about being a septuplet, Alex reflected, his usual humor giving way to something more contemplative, is that you never learn how to be alone. Even in our most private moments, there's always been someone within calling distance. Now, we're choosing to change that fundamental truth about our existence. The weight of his words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Even the interviewers seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, allowing the silence to stretch as each sibling processed this reality in their own way. Catherine's fingers drummed against her knee, a habit that emerged whenever she confronted challenging emotions. In basic training, they break you down to build you up stronger. But I've never been just me. I've always been 1/7 of a whole. How do you break down a fractions? Maybe that's not the right way to think about it, Marcus suggested, his political science mind seeking diplomatic solutions even in personal matters. We're not fractions of a whole. We're whole individuals who happen to be multiplied by 7. Our strength isn't in our division, but in our multiplication. Sophia's pencil moved across her sketchbook as she listened, capturing the subtle shifts in her siblings' expressions. I've been drawing us separately, she revealed, turning the book to show 7 individual portraits arranged in a circle. It's harder than drawing us together. There's something missing in each individual sketch, but when I arrange them like this, they create something new, a pattern of connection rather than a single unified image. That's exactly it, Emily agreed, her analytical mind finding clarity in Sophia's artistic interpretation. It's like a chemical reaction. We're not losing our bond. We're transforming it into something new. The elements remain the same, but the structure changes. Daniel set aside his book, his quiet voice carrying unexpected authority. I chose the gap year because I need to understand who I am when I'm not being compared to 6 other versions of myself. But that doesn't mean I want to sever our connection. I just need to understand my own story before I can contribute properly to our shared one. Rachel reached over to squeeze his hand, understanding flowing between them. That's why I chose New York, she admitted. Fashion design is my passion, but it's also my chance to create something that's uniquely mine. Every sketch, every pattern, every stitch will come from my singular vision, not our collective one. The interviewer observed their exchange with genuine interest. It sounds like you're all grappling with similar feelings, even as your paths diverge. How do you plan to maintain your connection across these different journeys? Marcus straightened in his chair, his leadership role emerging naturally. We've actually discussed this extensively. We're setting up a private blog where we can share our experiences, something just for us, away from public scrutiny. Weekly video calls are non-negotiable, and we've already scheduled our major breaks to align as much as possible. Plus, Alex added, his humor returning, I've created a shared calendar that looks like it could launch a space shuttle. Every important date, every milestone, every possible moment when we might need each other. It's all there, color-coded and cross-referenced. Emily nodded enthusiastically. I've also developed an app specifically for us. It's like a private social network, but with features tailored to our needs, time zone converters, instant group chats, shared photo albums, even a virtual hug button for those moments when we really miss each other. And I've designed special stationery for each of us, Sophia added softly. So we can write real letters sometimes, not just texts and emails. Something tangible to hold on to when the distance feels too great. Catherine's military precision found purpose in these plans. I've mapped out every airport, train station, and bus terminal between our various locations. Even with unpredictable military schedules, I'll always know the fastest way to reach any of you if needed. Their parents watched this exchange with quiet pride, seeing their children's different strengths emerge in how they approached this impending separation. Claire finally spoke, her voice gentle but firm. You've always had different ways of solving problems. Even as babies, you each had your own method of getting our attention, your own way of showing love. That's what makes me hopeful, Thomas added, his educator's perspective shining through. You're not trying to find identical solutions to this challenge. You're each approaching it in your own way, but with the shared goal of staying connected. The afternoon light had softened, casting a golden glow across their faces as they contemplated their father's words. In that moment, they weren't just the famous septuplets or even 7 individuals. They were something in between, something unique and precious that they were all determined to preserve, even as they evolved. Maybe that's the secret, Rachel mused, her designer's eye finding beauty in this complexity. We don't have to choose between being individuals and being septuplets. We can be both, just in a new way. The interviewer smiled warmly, recognizing the profound nature of this revelation. But before she could pose another question, a subtle shift occurred in the room's energy. The future they had been discussing suddenly felt very present, very real, and with it came a new wave of emotions that none of them had quite prepared for. Their lives had always been extraordinary, but this moment felt particularly significant. 7 individuals poised on the brink of separate adventures, held together by bonds that were both stretching and strengthening in ways they were only beginning to understand. As the interview continued, each sibling felt the weight of their choices, the excitement of their dreams, and the comforting certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together, even when apart. As the interview progressed, subtle tensions that had been simmering beneath the surface began to rise like air bubbles in still water. It started with a seemingly innocent question from the interviewer about their parents' reaction to their diverse choices. Actually, Alex began, his usual lighthearted tone carrying an edge that made his siblings glance sharply in his direction. Maybe we should talk about the reality of what these changes mean for everyone. Not just the exciting parts, but the real impact on our family. Claire and Thomas exchanged quick glances, recognizing the shift in the room's atmosphere. They had known this conversation was coming, had prepared for it, but that didn't make it any easier to navigate. The thing is, Alex continued, his hands gesturing with uncharacteristic uncertainty, someone needs to think about the practical aspects of all this. Mom and Dad have dedicated their entire lives to raising us, to managing our public image, to keeping this whole operation running. And now we're all just going to scatter to different corners of the country? Marcus started to interject, his diplomatic instincts kicking in, but Alex pressed on. No, let me finish. I chose to stay local for a reason. Not just because I love theater or because the program is good, but because I understand what our departure means for this family. The sponsors, the interviews, the public appearances, all of that doesn't just disappear because we turn 18. Rachel shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her perfectly maintained composure showing cracks. Are you suggesting we should base our life decisions on maintaining our media presence? That's exactly what we've always said we wouldn't do. I'm suggesting we need to be realistic, Alex countered, his voice rising slightly. Those sponsorships helped put together our college funds. They still help support this family. Mom had to give up her career to manage our lives, and Dad's salary alone isn't enough to maintain everything we've built. The cameras continued rolling, capturing this raw moment of family tension. The interviewer remained silent, understanding that she was witnessing something real and unscripted, the very thing that had made the Morrison septuplets so compelling to the public for all these years. Emily's scientific mind kicked into analysis mode. Actually, I've been researching this. Many of our sponsorship contracts have clauses that extend through our college years, regardless of our physical location. They're more interested in our individual success stories now than our unified presence. That's not the point, Alex insisted, frustration coloring his words. It's not just about the money. It's about responsibility, about family loyalty. Catherine straightened in her chair, her military bearing becoming more pronounced. Family loyalty doesn't mean sacrificing individual growth. That's not what Mom and Dad taught us. No. Daniel spoke up suddenly, his quiet voice cutting through the tension. But maybe Alex has a point about responsibility. Not in the way he's expressing it, but in the underlying concern. We're so focused on our individual futures that we might be overlooking the impact on our shared present. Sophia's pencil moved rapidly across her sketchbook, capturing the increasing tension in quick, sharp strokes. But isn't that what growing up means? Making choices that affect everyone around us? We can't stay in this protective bubble forever. Nobody's asking for forever, Alex shot back. But we're talking about completely dismantling a system that's worked for 18 years. Mom and Dad have structured their entire lives around us being together. Claire finally spoke, her voice gentle but firm. Alex, honey, that was our choice. We knew this day would come. We've been preparing for it. Have we? Alex challenged, his protective instincts fully engaged now. Because I see Mom flinching every time someone mentions August. I notice how Dad keeps updating the family calendar like he's trying to find a way to be in 7 places at once. I'm not blind to how this is affecting them. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken emotions. Thomas cleared his throat, clearly struggling to maintain his composure. Your mother, and I want you all to follow your dreams. That's what we've always wanted. But at what cost? Alex persisted. Rachel's going to New York, Marcus to California, Emily to Massachusetts, Sophia to Rhode Island, Catherine to wherever the Air Force sends her, and Daniel's going to be traveling the world. Meanwhile, I'll be the only one here to help pick up the pieces. Marcus leaned forward, his political science training evident in his measured response. You're making it sound like we're abandoning the family. We're choosing different paths, yes, but that doesn't mean we're walking away from our responsibilities. Doesn't it? Alex's voice cracked slightly. Tell me, how exactly are you going to fulfill your family obligations from across the country? How are any of you going to be there when Mom and Dad need support, when the media demands interviews, when our younger cousins need role models? The tension in the room had become almost tangible, like static electricity before a storm. Rachel stood suddenly, her carefully maintained composure finally breaking. That's not fair, Alex, and you know it. You don't get to claim moral high ground just because your dreams happen to keep you close to home. I'm not claiming moral high ground, Alex retorted, though his voice had lost some of its edge. I'm trying to be realistic about what our choices mean for this family. For our parents, Emily's hand trembled as she pushed her glasses up her nose, a gesture that had always betrayed her anxiety. I've actually been having panic attacks about this, she admitted quietly, drawing surprised looks from her siblings. The thought of being away from everyone, it's like trying to imagine functioning without vital organs. The rawness of her confession shifted the energy in the room. Catherine reached over to squeeze her sister's hand, her military toughness softening. Why didn't you tell us? Because I didn't want it to influence anyone's decisions, Emily replied, her voice stronger now. We've spent 18 years trying to balance individual needs with group dynamics. I didn't want my anxiety to become another weight on that scale. Claire moved to sit closer to her daughter, maternal instinct overriding her attempt to remain neutral. Sweetheart, you should have told us. We could have worked through this together. But that's exactly the problem, isn't it? Daniel interjected, setting aside his book completely. We've always worked through everything together. Maybe too much together. How do we learn to stand on our own if we never actually stand on our own? Marcus nodded slowly. Daniel's right. And Alex isn't entirely wrong either. We need to find a balance between independence and family responsibility. But that doesn't mean sacrificing our individual dreams. Nobody's asking for sacrifice, Alex insisted, running his hands through his hair in frustration. I'm asking for consideration, for acknowledgement that our choices affect more than just ourselves. Sophia looked up from her sketchbook, where she'd been capturing the intense emotions playing across her siblings' faces. Maybe we need to redefine what family responsibility means in this new phase of our lives. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. Sophia's right, Rachel agreed, settling back into her seat. We can find ways to support the family that don't require physical presence. I've already talked to some of our sponsors about individual partnerships that would actually increase their investment in the family brand. Thomas raised his eyebrows at this revelation. You have? Rachel nodded, her business acumen showing through her emotional state. Several companies are interested in following our individual journeys. They see it as an evolution of our story, not an ending. That's actually brilliant, Alex admitted reluctantly. But it doesn't address everything. What about the emotional support, the day-to-day presence? Catherine straightened in her chair, her military training evident in her posture. You know what they teach us about unit cohesion? It's not about physical proximity. It's about trust, commitment, and having each other's backs. Distance doesn't change that. And technology helps, Emily added, finding her scientific footing again. I've been developing that app one mentioned, but it's more sophisticated than I initially explained. It includes AI-driven scheduling that accounts for time zones, class schedules, and military duties. It can predict when we're most likely to need emotional support based on our historical patterns. The interviewer, who had been silent during this intense exchange, finally spoke. It seems like you're all grappling with very real fears and concerns about this transition. How do your parents feel about all of this? Claire and Thomas exchanged looks, years of shared parenting decisions passing between them in a glance. We're scared too, Claire admitted, her honesty drawing her children's complete attention. Of course we are. But we're also incredibly proud of how you're handling this. Even the arguings? Alex asked, a hint of his usual humor returning. Especially the arguing, Thomas replied with a small smile. Because you're not arguing about whether to support each other. You're arguing about how best to do it. That tells us we've done something right. The light in the room had shifted again, casting long shadows that seemed to connect them all like physical bonds. Marcus stood, his natural leadership emerging once more. Look, maybe we need to create a more concrete plan. Something that addresses everyone's concerns while still allowing us to pursue our individual paths. A family charter, Emily suggested, her organized mind already categorizing possibilities. With clear guidelines about communication, support, and responsibilities. But with flexibility built in, Catherine added. Military life has taught me that rigid plans often fail under real-world conditions. As they began to discuss specifics, the earlier tension gradually transformed into something more productive, a shared determination to find solutions that would work for everyone. Even Alex's expression softened as he watched his siblings engage with his concerns seriously rather than dismissively. The interview had become something none of them had expected, a catalyst for honest conversation about their fears and hopes for the future. As they worked through their differences, their parents watched with a mixture of pride and amazement, seeing their children navigate this complex transition with maturity and care for each other's feelings. The interview had aired 3 days ago, and its raw honesty had sparked another wave of media interest. But for once, the Morrison Septuplets were unavailable for comment. Their parents, showing the same careful planning that had guided them through 18 years of raising 7 children, had orchestrated a complete media blackout. The family had retreated to a secluded mountain cabin, far from the pressing eyes of cameras and the demanding buzz of phones. The cabin, nestled among towering pines, had been a wedding gift from Thomas's parents, a refuge they'd rarely had time to use during the whirlwind years of raising septuplets. Now, as the sun set behind snow-capped peaks, it became the setting for something more important than escape: healing. Emily stood at the kitchen window, watching as Alex and Marcus attempted to start a campfire in the stone pit outside. Their earlier tension hadn't completely dissipated, but it had transformed into something more manageable, like a storm cloud slowly breaking apart. They're doing it wrong, Catherine observed, coming to stand beside her sister. Her military training had included survival skills, and the sight of her brothers struggling with the kindling clearly tested her patience. They need to let them figure it out, Rachel interrupted gently, not looking up from where she sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching designs in her notebook. Sometimes the struggle is more important than the solution. The wisdom in those words hung in the air, applying to far more than just fire building. Sophia captured the moment in quick strokes in her sketchbook, her siblings silhouetted against the mountain backdrop, each lost in their own thoughts yet unconsciously oriented toward each other, like planets in a familiar orbit. Daniel sat in an ancient armchair by the window, a book open but unread in his lap. "It's quieter here," he observed. "Not just because we're away from the media, but because we're not trying so hard to be what everyone expects us to be." Claire emerged from the kitchen, carrying a tray of hot chocolate, 7 mugs, each still coated with their childhood colors despite their age. The sight brought smiles to her children's faces, remembering years of comfort found in this simple tradition. "Your father's setting up the telescope," she announced. "The sky should be beautiful tonight, this far from city lights." The mention of the telescope sparked something in Emily's memory. "Remember that night when we were 10? When Dad woke us all up at 3 in the morning to see the meteor shower?" "The only time breaking our strict sleep schedule was allowed," Marcus added, coming inside with Alex, both of them smelling of smoke and victory. They'd finally got the fire started. "That's not entirely true," Thomas said, appearing in the doorway. "There were quite a few schedule exceptions over the years. You just didn't know about most of them." His words caused them to look at their parents with renewed curiosity. Claire smiled, settling into her favorite chair. "You think it was easy keeping 7 toddlers on the same schedule? There were nights when we threw the rulebook out the window and just did whatever worked. But the magazines always portrayed you as having everything under perfect control," Rachel said, surprised. The Morrison method was practically trademarked. Thomas laughed, the sound echoing warmly in the cozy space. The Morrison method was more about adaptation than perfection. "We just learned to adapt in sync." Like that time with the chicken pox, Alex recalled, his earlier defensiveness softening into nostalgia. "Everyone thought it was so amazing that we all got it at exactly the same time. But that wasn't natural, was it?" Claire's eyes twinkled with long-held mischief. "Let's just say we understood the value of getting certain childhood milestones over with all at once." This revelation sparked a cascade of questions. Years of carefully maintained family mythology suddenly opened for examination. As they gathered around the fire pit outside, mugs of hot chocolate warming their hands against the mountain chill, stories began to flow more freely. "So all those perfectly coordinated first steps?" Catherine asked, her military precision giving way to amusement. "Oh, you all walked at different times," Thomas confirmed. "But try explaining to a magazine that wants the perfect story that development isn't actually synchronized, even in septuplets. We tried to protect you from the pressure of constant comparison," Claire added, her voice softening. "Sometimes that meant managing the narrative." Daniel looked up from his book, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Like when you told everyone we all started reading at the same time, even though I was obviously ahead and Catherine was more interested in sports." "Exactly," Thomas nodded. "We wanted you to develop at your own pace, but the world wanted 7 identical stories. So we learned to navigate between truth and expectation." The fire crackled, sending sparks upward to join the emerging stars. Sophia's pencil moved steadily across her paper, capturing this moment of revelation, her family's faces illuminated by firelight, edges softening as truth replaced carefully constructed image. As night fully descended, the mountain air grew crisp and clear. Thomas had set up the telescope, and they took turns viewing Jupiter's moons, the sight of distant worlds providing perspective on their earthbound concerns. The fire cast dancing shadows across their faces as they continued to unravel the carefully constructed tapestry of their public image. "I always felt guilty," Emily confessed, her voice barely above a whisper, "about winning the state science fair when we were 15. Everyone made such a big deal about how it proved we weren't just famous for being septuplets, that we had individual talents. But I worried it put pressure on the rest of you to achieve something equally noteworthy." "That's funny," Catherine replied, leaning back on her elbows in the grass, "because I felt the same way about making the national tennis team. Like somehow I was breaking ranks by standing out." Alex shifted closer to the fire, his earlier defensiveness completely dissolved. "Maybe that's why I relied so heavily on humor. It was safer to be the funny one than to risk outshining anyone. But don't you see?" Claire interjected gently. "That's exactly what we were trying to protect you from." The idea that you had to measure your achievements against each other rather than pursuing your own paths. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. And now we're doing it again, aren't we? Measuring our choices against some impossible standard of family obligation. I've been thinking about that, Rachel said, setting aside her sketch pad. Remember in the interview, when Alex talked about picking up the pieces? Maybe we've all been assuming there would be pieces to pick up, instead of seeing this as a natural evolution. Thomas adjusted the telescope's focus, his movements deliberate. Your mother and I have discussed this extensively. The truth is, we're not worried about picking up pieces. We're excited to see how this next chapter unfolds. Really? Alex's voice carried a note of skepticism. Because I've seen how Mom gets whenever anyone mentions August. Claire reached over to squeeze her son's hand.
Oh, sweetheart.
Those aren't tears of sadness. They're tears of pride. And yes, maybe a little anxiety, but not about losing you. About making sure you all feel secure enough to fly. The fire popped loudly, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. Sophia captured the moment in her sketchbook. The sparks joining the stars, 7 siblings and 2 parents linked by firelight and truth. I've been writing something, Daniel said suddenly, reaching for his ever-present notebook. A sort of meditation on our situation. Would you like to hear it? The others nodded, settling in closer as Daniel's quiet voice joined the night sounds. 7 starts, 7 paths, 7 journeys beginning. Not a fracturing, but a flowering. Each petal distinct, yet part of the same bloom. Distance measured not in miles, but in growth. Connection counted not in presence, but in love. Silence followed his words, broken only by the crackling fire and the distant call of a night bird. Emily wiped tears from her cheeks, not bothering to hide them. That's exactly it, she said finally. We're not breaking apart. We're blooming. The metaphor seemed to release something in all of them. Catherine sat up straighter, her military bearing softening. You know what I'm actually afraid of? Not that I'll lose you all, but that I'll lose myself. I've never been just Catherine. I've always been one of the Morrison Septuplets. But maybe that's the gift we're giving each other now, Marcus suggested. The chance to discover who we are individually, while knowing we have this incredible support system to fall back on. Rachel nodded enthusiastically. Like in fashion design, sometimes you have to deconstruct something to create something new and beautiful. And look how well we handled the conflict in the interview, Sophia observed, adding final touches to her sketch. We didn't fracture under pressure. We faced it together, even when we disagreed. Thomas adjusted the telescope one final time. Jupiter's moons are particularly clear tonight, he announced. It's remarkable how they each orbit at their own speed, at their own distance, yet they're all held together by the same gravitational force. The analogy wasn't lost on any of them. They took turns at the telescope, each lost in their own thoughts, yet connected by the moment. The mountain air carried the scent of pine and possibility, and gradually, the tension of the past few days fully dissolved into something new: acceptance, understanding, hope. Claire watched her children, her heart full. You know what I see when I look at each of you now? Not 7 parts of a whole, but 7 whole individuals who choose to be part of something greater. As the fire burned lower and the stars wheeled overhead, they began sharing more stories, not the carefully curated ones they told reporters over the years, but real, messy, beautiful truths about their lives together. Each revelation seemed to strengthen rather than weaken their bond, as if honesty was the mortar they needed to build this new phase of their relationship. The mountain retreat had become more than an escape from media attention. It had become a crucible for transformation, turning their fears and tensions into something stronger, more resilient. As midnight approached, they remained circled around the dying fire, 7 siblings and their parents, rewriting their story not for the public, but for themselves. The morning after their fireside revelations dawned clear and crisp, the mountain air sharp with possibility. They gathered around the cabin's large wooden table, the surface covered with laptops, calendars, and Emily's detailed planning notebooks. The retreat had given them clarity. Now it was time to transform understanding into action. Okay, Emily said, her scientific mind already organizing their discussion into manageable segments. We need to create something sustainable. Not just plans we'll abandon when things get busy, but real, workable solutions for staying connected while pursuing our individual paths. Marcus nodded, pulling out his color-coded calendar. I've been thinking about time zones. With me in California and Rachel in New York, we're looking at a 3-hour difference. Add in Catherine's potentially variable military schedule, and my international travel, Daniel added, looking up from his notebook. Exactly, Marcus continued. We need to establish some non-negotiable connection points that work across all schedules. Rachel reached for her tablet, her designer's eye already visualizing the possibilities. What if we thought about it like a fashion collection? Different pieces that work independently but are designed to complement each other. We could have daily check-ins in smaller groups, weekly full family video calls, and monthly in-depth conversations. I like that, Catherine said, her military training appreciating the structured approach. In the Air Force, we learn about maintaining unit cohesion across deployed teams. It's not about constant communication, it's about reliable, meaningful contact. Alex, who had been unusually quiet since their fireside discussions, finally spoke up. I've been thinking about my role here. Being the only one staying local, maybe instead of seeing it as a burden, I could be like our anchor point. Not the one left behind, but the one helping everyone stay grounded. Claire reached across the table to squeeze his hand, pride evident in her expression. That's a beautiful way to look at it, sweetheart. Actually, Sophia interjected, opening her sketchbook to a new design. That gives me an idea. What if we created a physical space here at home? A room dedicated to our connection, with artifacts from wherever we are, updated regularly. Like a living museum of our separate journeys, but brought together in one place. The idea caught fire immediately. Rachel sat up straighter, her creative energy igniting.
Yes.
I could send fabric swatches for my designs in New York. Emily could share her research findings from MIT. Catherine her military achievements. I could document it all, Daniel added, his writer's mind already crafting the narrative. Not for publication, but for us. A private chronicle of our evolving story. Thomas watched his children with quiet amazement, remembering the squabbling toddlers they'd once been. You're creating something unprecedented here, he observed. A new way of being family. Emily pulled out her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. I've been working on the app, but I'm expanding its capabilities based on everything we've discussed. Beyond just scheduling, it'll have private channels for different combinations of siblings, a shared journal function, and an AI-driven analysis of our communication patterns to help us identify when someone might need extra support. That's brilliant, Marcus said, leaning over to look at her screen. But we should also maintain some low-tech connections. Letters, like Sophia suggested earlier. Physical things we can hold on to when we miss each other. And care packages, Rachel added enthusiastically. Monthly boxes we send each other, filled with pieces of our new lives. I could send fashion samples from New York. Emily could share interesting findings from her lab. I could send local delicacies from wherever my literary travels take me, Daniel offered, warming to the idea. Catherine nodded thoughtfully. And I could share pieces of wherever I'm stationed. Create a kind of global connection through our experiences. Claire and Thomas exchanged glances, their eyes misting at their children's determination to maintain their bond while supporting each other's growth. The morning light streamed through the cabin's windows, illuminating the scene. 7 young adults gathered around a table, planning their future with the same determination they'd once applied to learning to walk, to read, to become themselves. There's something else we need to discuss, Thomas said carefully. The public aspect of all this. How do you want to handle the media interest in your separate journeys? The question hung in the air for a moment, weighted with 18 years of managed public presence. But now, fresh from their night of honest conversation, they approached it with new perspective. Marcus was the first to address their father's question about media management, his political science training evident in his measured response. I think we need to control the narrative rather than let it control us. Not by hiding, but by being selective and intentional about what we share. We could treat it like a portfolio, Rachel suggested, her fashion background influencing her perspective. Curate what we present to the world, while keeping the most precious parts private. Emily opened a new document on her laptop, ready to capture their thoughts. So we're talking about establishing clear boundaries between our public and private lives. What specifically do we want to keep just for us? The room Sophia suggested, Alex said immediately. That should be completely private. No cameras, no social media posts. Just our space. Catherine nodded emphatically. And our weekly video calls. Those need to be sacred space. No recording, no sharing, just us being completely honest with each other. What about my chronicles? Daniel asked, tapping his notebook. I could write 2 versions. One for us, with all the raw truth and messy reality, and one for the public that focuses on the inspiring aspects of our journey without exposing our vulnerabilities. That's exactly the kind of balance we need, Sophia agreed, sketching as she spoke. Like these drawings, I'll keep doing private ones that capture our real moments, but I can also create public pieces that tell the story we choose to share. Claire watched her children problem-solving together, her heart swelling with pride. You've grown so much wiser than those media consultants we used to rely on. Because we've lived it, Marcus reflected. We understand better than anyone the delicate balance between public interest and private life. Rachel pulled up some preliminary designs on her tablet. I've been working on something, a fashion line inspired by our story. Not obvious septuplet merchandise, but subtle pieces that represent transformation, connection, and individual growth. What if we used that as a template for how we handle our public presence? Meaningful, but not exploitative. I love that approach, Emily said, typing rapidly. We acknowledge our unique story without being defined by it. And we can each contribute in our own way. Rachel through fashion, Sophia through art, Daniel through writing. And I can coordinate it all locally, Alex added, his earlier reservations about staying behind transforming into purpose. Being here doesn't mean I'm stuck in our old story. It means I can help shape how we tell our new one. Thomas cleared his throat, emotion making his voice slightly rough. You know, when your mother and I first learned we were having septuplets, everyone told us it would be impossible to raise you as individuals, that the logistics alone would force us to treat you as a unit. But you proved them wrong, Catherine said softly. And now you're proving them wrong again, Claire added. Finding ways to be both separate and together, public and private, unique and united. Emily looked up from her laptop. I've drafted a framework for how we can structure all of this. Regular check-ins, content sharing schedules, privacy protocols, but with enough flexibility to adapt as our lives evolve. The morning had stretched toward afternoon as they continued refining their plans. Sophia captured the scene in her sketchbook, 7 siblings surrounded by technology, yet connected by something far more fundamental than devices or schedules. There's one more thing, Marcus said, his voice taking on a formal tone. I think we should make a pact. Not about staying the same or maintaining our public image, but about supporting each other's growth. About celebrating our differences as much as our connection. One by one, they added their voices to the pact. Rachel promised to send fashion pieces that reflected each sibling's evolving style. Emily committed to using her technical skills to keep them connected without feeling tethered. Sophia pledged to continue capturing their story through art, both public and private versions. Catherine vowed to share her strength and discipline, helping them all stay focused on their goals. Daniel promised to chronicle their journey with honesty and insight. Alex committed to being their anchor, not their keeper, supporting their independence while maintaining their home base. As the afternoon light filled the cabin, they had created something new, a framework for their future that honored both their unique paths and their shared journey. The plans they made weren't just about staying in touch. They were about growing together while growing apart, about transforming their story from one of septuplets to one of 7 individuals choosing to remain deeply connected. Claire and Thomas watched their children with quiet joy, seeing in their careful planning and thoughtful discussions the fruits of 18 years of nurturing individual spirits within their extraordinary circumstances. The cabin, which had started as a retreat from tension, had become a launching pad for their future, a future they would craft together, even as they lived it apart. You know what this reminds me of? Alex said, a genuine smile lighting his face. "Remember when we were little and we used to build those enormous blanket forts? Each of us had our own corner, but we were all connected by the same roof." The metaphor struck home, causing nodding heads and knowing smiles. They were building something similar now, a structure that would allow them to venture out into their own spaces while maintaining the shelter of their shared foundation. 1 week after their mountain retreat, the Morrison septuplets sat once again before cameras, but something had fundamentally shifted. The same interviewer who had witnessed their earlier tensions now faced 7 individuals who radiated a quiet confidence. The family living room, once staged for countless interviews, felt different too, more authentic, with subtle signs of their upcoming transitions visible in half-packed boxes and college pennants. "Welcome back," the interviewer began, noting the changed atmosphere. "You've been away from the public eye for a week, quite unusual for the Morrison septuplets. Would you like to share what that time meant for you?" Marcus glanced at his siblings, receiving slight nods of encouragement. They had discussed this moment during their retreat, agreeing that their traditional spokesperson role could evolve like everything else. "Actually," he said, "we'd each like to share what we've discovered, if that's all right. Not just about our future plans, but about who we are and who we're becoming." The interviewer nodded, settling back as Emily began, her voice steady despite her natural shyness. "I'm heading to MIT for biochemistry, but what I've realized is that my love of science isn't just about research. It's about finding patterns in chaos, understanding how separate elements can come together to create something new. Just like our family." Rachel smoothed her carefully chosen outfit, a piece from her preliminary collection inspired by transformation. "Fashion Institute of Technology is my destination, but my designs aren't just about clothes. They're about how we present ourselves to the world while staying true to who we are. Each piece I create will tell a story of individuality within unity." Catherine sat with military precision, but her expression was softer than in their previous interview. "The Air Force is my chosen path, and yes, it will take me far from home. But what I've learned is that distance isn't measured in miles. It's measured in the strength of the bonds you forge. Stanford's political science program awaits me," Marcus added, "where I'll study how societies balance individual rights with collective good. It's a question I've lived my entire life, being part of this extraordinary family." Sophia opened her sketchbook, revealing a new drawing. 7 distinct paths flowing from a single point, interweaving but never losing their individual courses. "Rhode Island School of Design will help me develop my artistic voice, but my family has already taught me the most important lesson, that beauty exists in both unity and diversity." Daniel closed his ever-present book, making eye contact with the camera for perhaps the first time in their media history. "My gap year isn't about escaping our story, it's about understanding it better. As I travel and write, I'll be exploring how individual narratives contribute to larger tales, how personal journeys create collective meaning." Alex, whose humor had always deflected deeper emotions, spoke with unexpected seriousness. "Staying here to study theater at the University of Iowa isn't a compromise or a sacrifice. It's my choice, my path. Being close to home doesn't mean staying in place. It means creating a strong foundation from which everyone can soar." The interviewer leaned forward, clearly moved by their individual declarations. "These are beautiful aspirations, but they're also significant changes for a family that's been so closely united. How will you maintain your connection?" Claire and Thomas, seated slightly apart from their children, exchanged proud glances as their carefully constructed media presence gave way to something more authentic. The camera caught sight of Emily's planning notebooks, Rachel's design sketches, Sophia's artwork, all the tangible signs of their preparation for this new chapter. "We've created something new," Emily explained, pulling out her tablet to demonstrate the app she'd developed. "A way of staying connected that honors both our bond and our independence. It's not about maintaining our public image anymore. It's about supporting each other's growth." Rachel gestured to a cleared corner of the living room, where the beginnings of their connection room were taking shape. "We're transforming our story. Instead of 7 people living the same life, we're choosing to weave our different lives together." The interviewer noticed the change in their dynamic, how they now took turns speaking, how they referenced each other's thoughts while maintaining their individual perspectives. This seems like a very different approach from what we've seen before. Marcus nodded at the interviewer's observation. It is different. We've spent 18 years being seen as a single unit, the famous seven, the Morrison Septuplets. But what we've realized is that our real strength comes from our differences, not just our similarities. The public has always been fascinated by how alike we are, Catherine added, her military bearing softened by a genuine smile. But the truth is, our differences have always been our greatest asset. We're not 7 copies of the same person. We're 7 unique individuals who happen to share an extraordinary bond. The camera panned across their faces, capturing subtle variations in similar features. 7 variations on a theme, each telling its own story. Rachel's fashion-forward outfit, Catherine's precise posture, Emily's thoughtful glasses adjustments, Alex's expressive hands, Sophia's artist's gaze, Daniel's quiet intensity, and Marcus's diplomatic smile. "We want to be honest with our supporters," Emily said, her scientific mind finding the right words to explain their evolution. "Our story isn't ending, it's transforming. Like any good experiment, we're not changing the fundamental elements. We're discovering new ways they can interact." Thomas cleared his throat, emotion evident in his voice. "As parents, our greatest hope was always that you would find your own paths. We just never expected those paths to be so beautifully aligned with who each of you are." Speaking of paths, the interviewer said, gesturing to the college pennants and military insignia displayed around the room, "You're all embarking on very different journeys. What would you like people to understand about this next chapter?" Sophia opened her sketchbook again, revealing a series of interconnected drawings. "I've been trying to capture this transition in my art. Each page shows a different aspect of our future, separate but connected, like branches of the same tree growing in different directions. Or like a fashion collection," Rachel added, building on her sister's metaphor. "Each piece unique, but part of a greater whole. That's how I see our future. We're not breaking apart. We're creating something new together." Daniel, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "During my travels, I'll be writing about transformation, how people and relationships evolve while maintaining their essential truth. Our family is living that story. And I'll be here," Alex said, his usual humor tempered by newfound purpose, not as the one left behind, but as the anchor point for all these amazing journeys. "Our home isn't just a place we're leaving, it's a launch pad we can always return to." Claire wiped away tears as she watched her children articulate their vision for the future. The cameras caught this genuine moment of maternal pride, so different from the carefully staged emotions of their past interviews. "We've been incredibly blessed by public support throughout our lives," Marcus acknowledged, addressing the cameras directly. "Now we're asking for something new, not to be seen as a spectacle or a curiosity, but as 7 young adults trying to make our way in the world, while keeping the precious gift of our unique bond." Emily pulled out her tablet one last time, showing a preview of her Connection app. "Technology will help us stay in touch, but it's not about maintaining constant contact. It's about meaningful connection, about supporting each other's dreams while pursuing our own. The Morrison method is evolving," Catherine said with a slight smile, referencing the parenting strategy that had made their family famous. "Now it's about maintaining unity through diversity, strength through independence." As the interview drew to a close, the family gathered for one final photograph. But unlike the carefully staged portraits of their past, this one captured something real. 7 siblings on the cusp of adulthood, their parents standing proud behind them, all of them ready to embrace the next chapter of their extraordinary story. The light through the windows cast a warm glow across their faces as they stood together one last time before their paths would diverge. Each face held a different expression: Emily's quiet determination, Rachel's creative excitement, Catherine's disciplined hope, Marcus's diplomatic confidence, Sophia's artistic vision, Daniel's contemplative peace, and Alex's genuine joy. "We're not ending our story," Marcus said as the cameras prepare to stop rolling. "We're just beginning to tell it in 7 different voices. But harmony," Rachel added, "is made more beautiful by different notes played together." The interview concluded, but the Morrison septuplets remained standing together, their unity now stronger for embracing their differences. Through the window, they could see their small town preparing for the changes to come. The familiar streets that would soon lead them in different directions. The community that had supported them for 18 years now ready to see them soar. As the crew packed up their equipment, the family shared knowing looks. Tomorrow would bring more packing, more preparations, more steps toward their separate futures. But today, in this moment, they were still together, not as the famous seven, but as seven individuals choosing to remain beautifully, uniquely connected. Thomas and Claire watched their children with hearts full of pride and hope. The story that had begun 18 years ago with an unprecedented birth was transforming into something even more remarkable, a testament to the power of family to nurture both unity and individuality, togetherness and independence, love and growth. The famous septuplets were growing up, growing apart, and growing stronger, together and separately, writing the next chapters of their lives in 7 distinct voices that would always harmonize in the song of family.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.